luz check engine de tu vehículo está encendida? Podemos ayudarte con O'Reilly Veriscan. Es gratis y provee un informe con soluciones basadas en más de 650 millones de escaneos verificados por técnicos maestros certificados ASE. Y si necesitas ayuda, podemos recomendarte un taller. Pregunta por O'Reilly Veriscan.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Okay, so today we're going to dive into some really interesting stuff, like how the lines between, our physical world and the digital world are getting blurry when it comes to all these cyber threats and investigations and all that.
Yeah.
And you've given me some really fascinating materials covering everything from like those basic online things we do every day to, some pretty serious cyber intelligence stuff.
Right.
So our goal today is to kind of sift through all of that and pull out those key takeaways that are really going to matter for people, without overwhelming them with too much tech jargon and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're seeing more and more is that, those old lines between physical and digital, they're kind of disappearing, especially when we talk about security.
Okay.
And these sources you've shared, there's packed with examples of exactly how that's happening, and that's what we're going to explore today, to give you some real practical stuff you can use.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Yeah.
We're going to start with something that affects pretty much everyone online. Those online file converters, the ones I mean, like turning a Word doc into a PDF or making an MP3 out of an MA4 file.
Great. Yeah.
Well, the FBI has actually put out a warning about these things. It's something most of us probably don't even think twice about, right?
Yeah, totally.
After that, we're going to look at this new phishing trick that's using Google Ads, which is pretty clever, actually. Then we'll talk about Google buying that cybersecurity company, Mandiant.
Right.
I think you might have heard some early rumors about them going after a company called WHS.
Yeah.
But it ended up being Mandiant. And then we'll get into how things happening in the real world, offline stuff, can actually kick off these cyber attacks. And to wrap things up, we'll talk about how important open source intelligence, or OSINT, is becoming in all of this.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot to cover, but let's start with those file converters, right?
Okay.
The FBI is saying these tools that we use to switch files between different formats, they're becoming a popular way for malware to sneak onto our computers.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about all of this is that these attackers, they're playing on our need for quick and easy answers online.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So these malicious file converters, they often pop up at the top of our search results because the attackers are actually paying to promote them.
Oh, wow.
They're taking advantage of how we just tend to click that first thing we see. We assume it's safe and legit.
Right. It's like when you just need to convert a file fast, you type it into Google and you just click the first link without even really thinking about it.
Exactly.
But what the FBI is saying is that these seemingly helpful tools can actually install some pretty nasty malware on your computer.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about Trojans, those things that can give someone remote access to your whole system. Then there are stealers, which are designed specifically to grab your passwords and all your sensitive data. And then there's ransomware, which can basically lock down your whole computer until you pay a ransom.
Right. It's like a digital wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where having multiple layers of security is so crucial, right? Because if by some chance malware does get on your computer through one of these fake converters, having something like multi-factor authentication, MFA, that extra step where you get a code sent to your phone or something, that becomes a really crucial safety net.
It is. Because even if they somehow manage to steal your password, they're still locked out. Without that second piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so the big takeaway here is be really careful when you're looking for any kind of online tool.
Yeah.
Right, and especially if you're using a work computer, you should always check with your IT department to see what they recommend.
Absolutely.
And try to resist just downloading things on impulse, and never, ever give admin permissions to a program unless you're absolutely sure you can trust where it came from.
Right.
And like the FBI strongly advises, make sure you've got MFA set up for all your important online accounts. So now let's move on to another really sneaky tactic that's been going around, phishing attacks that are using Google Ads.
Oh, yeah.
This new campaign is specifically targeting users of SEMrush, which is a platform that a lot of big companies use, over 40% of the Fortune 500, actually.
Yeah. And what makes this so clever and so worrying is that it plays on the trust we have in Google, both the search results and the ads that show up there.
Right.
So what these attackers are doing is they're creating these fake ads that look exactly like the login pages for SEMrush and even for Google Ads itself.
Oh, wow.
So if you're a SEMrush user and you search for it on Google, you might see an ad right at the top that looks totally legit. You click on it thinking you're going to log in, but you're actually on a fake page set up to steal your username and password.
It's so tricky, right? Because it's using that familiar Google interface. You think you're logging into your SEMrush account or your Google Ads account, but you're actually giving your login details right to these criminals. And once they have that, I mean, the damage they can do is huge. You could be looking at identity theft, and if they get into your SEMrush account, they can start all kinds of fake ad campaigns.
Exactly. Access to your Google account is like giving them a key to so much sensitive information. They could send malicious emails or get into your personal data stored on Google services. And if they get into your SEMrush account, they could really mess with a company's online presence, even impersonate them.
So what can you do to protect yourself from this? Well, it's kind of similar to what we were saying about the file converters.
Yeah.
Be super careful with those sponsored ads you see at the top of your search results.
Right.
Try to scroll down to the organic results whenever you can. And always, always check the website address in your browser's address bar before you type in any login information. Does it look right? Does it match the official website exactly? And again, having two-factor authentication turned on is a huge step in protecting yourself.
Huge.
Even if you accidentally type your password into a fake login page, that extra verification step can stop them from getting in.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about something pretty big that's been happening in the cybersecurity world. Google acquiring Mandiant. Now, you might remember hearing some early rumors about Google maybe buying a company called WHS for something like $32 billion.
Yeah.
Well, they ended up buying Mandiant, but those early rumors just show how much importance is being placed on cloud security right now.
It's huge. And the price tag for this acquisition, it was reportedly the most Google's ever spent. It just highlights how crucial cybersecurity has become, especially when it comes to those cloud computing environments.
Right.
Mandiant, they specialize in securing cloud infrastructure across all those major platforms like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and even Google Cloud itself.
Yeah, it makes you think, as more and more businesses have moved everything to the cloud, maybe security wasn't always the top priority. It's like everyone was in such a rush to get to this new digital world that now we're realizing we need much better security measures in place.
Right.
And companies like Mandiant, they have that expertise and the tools to analyze and strengthen those cloud setups, right?
Absolutely. And what's really interesting here is this shift towards being more proactive about security.
Right.
Instead of just reacting to breaches after they happen, the focus is shifting to preventing them in the first place.
Right.
Mandiant has this deep understanding of threats and a lot of experience in responding to major cyber incidents. That's incredibly valuable in helping organizations find those weak spots and fix them before someone can exploit them.
Yeah.
And, the fact that even antitrust regulators were looking into this deal with a big financial penalty if it didn't go through, it really shows the high stakes and how competitive the cybersecurity market is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. This acquisition really says a lot about how strengthening cloud security is now a key part of fighting cyber threats.
It is.
Okay, now let's talk about something that might seem a little less technical, but it's actually super important. The real-world roots of cyber threats.
Okay.
We tend to think of these cyber attacks as happening purely in the digital world, but often they start in the physical world.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's a really important point to understand.
It is.
How we act in the real world, it has a direct impact on our digital security. Like, think about it. Something as simple as throwing away documents with your personal info on them without shredding them first.
Mm-hmm.
That can give attackers a ton of data.
Yeah.
Or stolen credit cards. That's an obvious physical threat that leads to digital fraud.
Right.
Even something like someone looking over your shoulder or shoulder surfing to steal your password in public, that can have some serious online consequences.
It can.
And it's often those little everyday things, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
We've all seen those sticky notes on computer monitors with passwords written on them, or even the photos we share on social media.
Oh, yeah.
You might post a picture of your home office, but if your Wi-Fi password is visible somewhere in the background, you've just shared your network security with everyone.
Exactly. These small slips in physical security can make our digital lives so much more vulnerable. And it's not just about being careful personally, businesses also need to have good physical security to protect their digital stuff.
Absolutely. There was a really interesting example from Switzerland that you shared. These cyber criminals pretended to be an official organization and sent letters through the mail, but they included QR codes in the letters, and when people scanned them, they were taken to these fake websites designed to steal their personal and banking details.
Oh.
It's a perfect example of how those traditional physical methods are being combined with digital tactics.
What's really interesting there is how it plays on our trust in things that look official. People are used to getting letters from organizations, and the QR code just adds a modern touch.
Right.
It shows how we need to be careful with all kinds of communication, not just email or online stuff.
So, what kind of things should we be watching out for in our daily lives to avoid these kinds of scams? Well, that Swiss example shows that we should be very wary of any mail we get that we weren't expecting, especially if it has QR codes or links asking for personal info. Always think twice before you scan.
Yeah.
Another thing is those USB drives you might find lying around. It might be tempting to plug it in and see what's on it, but you should always scan it with antivirus software first and never use the auto-run feature.
Yeah, never.
And this is super important. Never give your personal or financial information to anyone who calls you claiming to be from your bank, a government agency, or a tech company.
Right.
Legitimate organizations will never ask for that over the phone.
Never.
Be careful at ATMs, too. Watch out for anything suspicious attached to the card reader, and always cover the keypad when you're entering your PIN. And that same caution should apply to emails asking for information. Just because it looks official doesn't mean it is. And like we said earlier, be really careful about the photos and information you share online. What might seem harmless could be revealing a lot more than you intend. You shared that story about a student who left a notebook with their personal details unattended. A small mistake that could have had big digital consequences.
Yeah. It shows how taking care of your cybersecurity isn't just about passwords and software updates. It's about having that security mindset all the time, online and offline.
Now, speaking of phone calls, it's important to remember that those scams are still around, and in some ways, they're getting even trickier. Scammers might even use local accents or already have some of your info to sound more convincing. And all of this is happening with real people making these calls, even before we get into the whole AI thing.
Oh, yeah. AI is definitely going to make these phone scams or voice phishing even worse. Voice cloning will make it much easier for them to sound exactly like someone you know, which is scary because it increases the risk of falling for their tricks.
You mentioned some scams related to energy companies offering fake deals.
Oh, yeah.
Those prey on people wanting to save money, but it's all a trick to get your information.
Exactly. It's a constant back and forth. As we get better at security, the attackers are always looking for new ways to get around it, even if it means using those older methods like phone calls.
Now, there's this worrying trend that's kind of the opposite of what we usually think of as cybercrime. Criminals are using those fake but legit-looking websites to buy stuff and then have it delivered to completely innocent people.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
It's like they're taking advantage of how online shopping works, and it can drag people into something illegal even though they have nothing to do with it.
What's interesting is how it exploits those online shopping systems, and people whose addresses get used might not even know till they start getting deliveries they didn't order, or even worse, when the police show up.
That's why it's so important to do what's called ego surfing. Basically searching for your own name and info online regularly. That can help you find and hopefully remove anything that could be used for fraud. The example you shared about someone selling a jet ski online and accidentally revealing its location in a photo, which then got stolen.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good reminder that even small details in our online posts can have real-world consequences.
Yeah. Monitoring your online presence is becoming more and more important. Using different email addresses for different things online, like one for banking and one for shopping, is a good way to manage your risk. And setting up alerts for your credit card activity can help you spot unauthorized transactions quickly.
Right. And be extremely careful about sharing your personal details online, things like photos, your location, or vacation plans. You have the right to ask for your data to be removed if it's published without your consent, and if you see anything suspicious, report it to the authorities.
Definitely. Taking control of your digital footprint and being proactive about security is so important now. Know what information is out there about you and take steps to protect it.
Speaking of tools for protection, you mentioned Panda Security's dark web scanner.
Yeah.
That tool can check if your email and other info have been compromised and are on the dark web.
Uh-huh.
It might be scary to find out, but knowing is the first step to doing something about it.
It's true. Tools like that can give you heads up about potential threats you might not even know about. And combining that with using a password manager, to create and store strong, unique passwords for every site you use, that can really reduce your risk of getting hacked.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the simple stuff like keeping your software updated.
Right.
Those updates often have really important security fixes. It's like locking your doors and windows in the digital world.
Exactly. It's about creating layers of security, being careful in the real world, taking proactive steps online, and using the tools that are available. That's how you stay ahead of those ever-changing cyber threats.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about open source intelligence, OSINT for short.
Okay.
It's a fascinating area that's getting a lot of attention these days. Basically, it's about collecting information from public sources. It's not a brand new concept, but its importance in cybersecurity is definitely growing.
And what's really cool about OSINT is that it's a double-edged sword. It's used by the good guys, for things like penetration testing to find weaknesses, social engineering reconnaissance to gather info, and red teaming to simulate attacks. But it's also used for defense, like monitoring company assets, gathering intel on threats, and getting a bigger picture of the cyber threat landscape. Law enforcement agencies are also using it more and more to track cybercrime and even physical crimes.
You can tell there's a lot of interest in OSINT with those dedicated conferences like Asymptomatico popping up. And those OSINT tracks at big security events like RootedCon are super popular now. Jess Ferreira, an expert in OSINT and author of OSINT and Social Networks, talks a lot about how relevant it's becoming.
Right, and it's all about the sheer amount of info people put online willingly. Of course, having intuition and analytical skills helps anyone working in OSINT. But the fact is, the data is often out there, just waiting to be found and analyzed.
It's amazing when you think about it, isn't it?
It is.
People give away valuable information without even realizing it, just through their everyday social media posts. Like, think about new employees who are excited about their new job and post pictures of company swag. That could reveal stuff about the technology they use, or even show their login details if they're visible in the background of a photo.
Oh, for sure.
It's like those little oversharing mistakes end up being gifts for OSINT investigators.
And even people who are trying to be careful about their digital footprint still leave clues. It's about understanding those little indicators and knowing where to look for them in all that public data.
The examples you gave were really eye-opening. The one about using Strava, the fitness app,
Yep.
An investigator used a fake GPS location to watch activity around a sensitive place, like a prison. And by looking at the workout data people shared, they could figure out the routines of the staff based on their running or cycling routes. It's like something out of a spy movie, but with fitness tech.
Right, and that example shows how seemingly normal data, when you put it all together and look at it the right way, can reveal really sensitive stuff about locations and routines. The other example, which is even more serious, involved a Russian general in the Ukraine conflict who was killed after sharing his running routes on Strava. Ukrainian intelligence used that info to find and target him. That shows just how real the consequences can be for what we share online.
That's a powerful reminder that what we do online can have a very real impact offline. And it brings us back to our discussion about those physical and digital threats being linked. OSINT is like a starting point for gathering information for both offense and defense in cybersecurity. It helps us see how those vulnerabilities we talked about can be used by attackers.
Absolutely. It's that initial intel that guides further investigation and action. It helps organizations figure out where they might be vulnerable, identify new threats, and ultimately develop better, more focused security measures.
It seems like big companies are realizing how valuable it is to have dedicated teams for threat hunting and cyber threat intelligence. But it sounds like smaller companies need to catch up.
They do?
Staying up to date on those publicly known vulnerabilities and potential threats through OSINT is becoming essential for any organization, big or small, to be proactive about their defense.
It's no longer a luxury. Being able to monitor those open sources for information about your industry, your company, and in new threats is a necessity. OSINT gives you that early warning.
This whole deep dive has really shown me how connected our physical and digital lives are when it comes to security. From using those online file converters to the little bits of data we leave behind in the real world and online, those vulnerabilities are everywhere. And OSINT really proves how powerful publicly available information can be and why knowing what's out there about us online is so important.
Absolutely. We've seen how threats can start in the physical world and move to the digital world, and vice versa. OSINT gives us the tools to understand these connections and build better defenses.
So as you go through your day, I want you to think about all those little pieces of info you share, both online and offline. Think about how those seemingly unimportant details could be put together to create a bigger security risk. What can you do to minimize your exposure, both in your digital habits and your everyday actions? This is something we all need to keep learning about as the digital world changes.
It's all about developing that security mindset in every part of your life. The threats are always changing, so we have to change with them.
O'Reilly.
¿La luz check engine de tu vehículo está encendida? Podemos ayudarte con O'Reilly VeriScan. Es gratis y provee un informe con soluciones basadas en más de 650 millones de escaneos verificados por técnicos maestros certificados ASE. Y si necesitas ayuda, podemos recomendarte un taller. Pregunta por O'Reilly VeriScan.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.